Welcome back to another episode of the Gait Guys podcast. Sean Allen here in Chicago. We'll be on with Ivo in just a moment. Hey, we wanted to remind you about the South Loop podcast in case you missed that one. It's over on our blog, and we've got another one up with Tina Muir over at Runners Connect. We did a really great show with her a couple weeks ago, and it's launch time, so make sure you check that one out. And on the other side of this little guitar riff, we're going to go into some sponsors and then right smack dab into the middle of the show. So we'll see you in just a second. We wanted to thank Pond 5 for helping us out with some tunes this week. And let's see. Sponsors. Well, we've got Tried and True, New Balance Chicago. Hey, if you guys haven't checked out that MX40 yet, we'd really like you to. I've tried them on. They're pretty sweet. 4mm training shoe, new cross-training type shoe. It's a beauty. And I've got a lot of favorites, and they've got a whole new section of 4mm and 6 and 8mm shoes. They've got some really great shoes up in their lineup. We need you guys to go over and check out one of their stores in the 5 locations here in the Chicagoland area. Just head over to newbalancechicago.com. Most of their shoe stores have a National Shoe Fit course attendee who has been through the course and understands all the nuances and intricacies of proper shoe fit. Make sure you check them out at newbalancechicago.com. Also, hey, we've got good old ultrarunning.com, and I'm loving my new desert boot. A little bit more cushion than the Ultra every day. Certainly it's got the nice roomy toe box, the zero drop heel on it. It's a little lighter than the everyday, and it's definitely got a little bit more cushion. I'm finding it's way more comfortable around the office. Looks a little bit more professional. I'd say they probably should work on their styling a little bit if you ask me, but hey, what do I know? I'm a bald guy with a gray beard who hasn't bought any new clothes in a long time, so what do I know about style? But I guess that's what happens when you're about to turn 50. But anyways, it's a great shoe, and I really don't care what it looks like. It could be a lot worse, could be a lot better, but it's a great shoe. And it's probably been a couple years now since I've been in Ultras at work all day long. So I live in my New Balances pretty much on the weekend, around the yard, going out for a run, on the trails, hiking. And I'm in my Ultras at the office. I'd like to get a pair of the new Lone Peaks, try those guys out on the trail here. Maybe some winter running. That would be pretty cool. Been thinking about that a lot. So anyways, ultrarunning.com and newbalancechicago.com. Thanks for sponsoring the show. And let's start looking at our topics for the week here. Hey, you know what? Forget that. Let's just get right in with the topics. Here we go. See you on the other side. Show. How are you, Dr. Ivo?
I am doing just well in the beautiful state of Colorado here. How are things in Chicagoland, Dr. Allen?
I'm just Trumpy.
Trumpy.
It's an interesting day in the neighborhood here in the United States. We have a new president coming down the path, and that's something that we probably won't talk about. So that's probably enough, right? That'll keep us out of trouble. That'll keep us out of trouble with everybody. So just in case you've been living under a rock somewhere on this planet, yeah, that's the news. And take it for what it's worth. And, you know, hey, there's good and bad with everything. We've had good and bad for the last 8 years, and we had good and bad the 8 years prior to that, and 8 years prior to that. So we'll see how we do.
We need to find a clip of Donald Trump walking.
Hey.
So we can look at his gait.
Now you're talking. All right.
That's what I want to do, and Hillary as well.
Yes,
so we can see if she really does have some sort of neurological issue or not.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk on the neurology forums that she had maybe some Parkinsonian type syndromes or symptoms. Excuse me. There was that one video where she was falling backwards. It looked like there was a kind of a center of pressure thing where she was leaning up against a post, waiting for her car entourage to pick her up, and as she stepped away from this post that she was kind of leaning up against, she had this posterior pitch. Did you see that video?
I did not. I do not watch television, so.
Yeah, well, this is on the news actually, but she stood up, and as she got erect, like imagine leaning up against a wall at a party. That's what it looked like she was doing. And then when she got vertical, she literally had this like extension lurch backwards, and some of the guys on the neurology forum were going like, "Oh, that's a classic first sign." You know, I think that's kind of like the standing. You know, you do that test. In fact, you just put it up on social media today, where you have the people stand on one leg and then stand on one leg and close your eyes and then tilt your head back, and it kind of helps discriminate between visual and vestibular and proprioceptor, right? Mechanoreceptors.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah, so maybe she had some vestibular stuff. Who knows? But yeah, there's plenty of goofy pictures out there with her one eye drifting and some bizarre outbursts. So yes, let's look for some fun pictures. We did Vladimir Putin at one point with his KGB walk. You know, they teach those guys to walk funny with that one arm, so it's always ready to grab their gun. So we'll see what good old Donald J. Trump has up his sleeve here in his gait. So yes, stay tuned, folks. We're on the task.
The gate cam is always on.
See if we can find someone over there at the White House to put a spy cam up for gait for us. Yeah. All right, great idea. Like it. Let's see what we can find. Folks, if you come across something juicy, send it over. We'll see what we can do with that. So maybe we can figure out what's wrong with that man. And what's right, of course. Just in case the FBI are listening. So, we've got some fun stuff here on the neuroscience. Imagining workouts can improve strength. Most people probably like this one. If you could lie in bed for 20 minutes and go through a workout and get the physiologic benefits of that would be pretty cool. Certainly would save the drive time to the gym. What do you think of this one?
You know, I thought it was interesting. I think it's a little misleading as far as the physiology goes. We need certain external stimuli to cause things like increased mitochondrial content and increased capillarization of muscle and things like that. But mentally, we can certainly facilitate neuronal pathways through stuff that we've talked about in past podcasts called neural adaptation. In other words, you're just improving the efficiency of the pathway that you're trying to activate. And that whole looking at things in your mind's eye before you're going to do it and practicing, it's going to increase your accuracy as well as ability to do that. We've known that for a long time, and this is just a study that shows that.
Yeah, the study went into some other stuff. It even went as far as to suggest that science is suggestive that being exercise of adverse is a sign of superior intelligence. And, the big takeaway they said in this study, the physical sacrifice of thinking, investigating the relationship between thinking and physical activity in everyday life has some correlation there. And this was in a very, very highly reputable journal, the Sage Journal of Health and Psychology.
Yes.
Yes. That's one that you should reference often. So this was done over at Carleton University, and a cognitive psychologist, Jim Davies, did the study, and he explained that perhaps just imagining a workout can make you stronger. And the magic number for mental practice session appears to be 20 minutes, according to the analysis of multiple studies. Well, as you alluded to, there's probably a lot of missing pieces here, but there is something to this study, and it's why I threw it in here, because it certainly isn't rocket science here, but I mean, if you could think about exercising and get fitter, if you thought about cheeseburgers, would you get fatter or get, a little bit less in shape? But my point in bringing this all up was that I often tell my runners, look, now your job now that we've got you a little bit more functional, is I want you to go for runs. We're going to start with a 1 to 2 mile run. I know that's not a lot, Mr. Jones, but what I want you to do is I want you to go on a very brief run. And during that run, yes, we've got a lot of issues here. We've got you doing shuffle, gait, homework. We've got you doing some hip extension work. I want you on each run to focus on one specific task. I want you to focus on the right glute for 10 steps at a time. Try to get into a good clean hip extension pattern. Can you fire the glute? Can you feel it working? Do you feel like you're stacking your hip over your knee over your foot? And then maybe 10 steps on the other side. And then let's do that 10 steps again on the right, 10 steps on the left. And then, for the second half of the mile, I'd like you to focus on foot placement. Are you on the outside of the right of your foot? Or on the outside of the right foot? Are you on the outside of the left foot? How's your toe extension? So I use these short runs to focus on little pieces, and I call them running meditations. And so if a client has a problem, just have them focus on it. You've got people who, when they do a squat, that right knee comes in medially. So during that run, I want them to focus on that right knee and getting into the glute and stacking the limb and getting controlling some of that rotation. So, thinking about that during the run certainly helps, but also visualizing it, maybe even sitting down before a run so that you can start to visualize what it should look like and what it should feel like, and then you go out and you do it. These things are important. They're important to make corrections because, the physiology isn't disconnected from the brain. Do you do this kind of stuff with your clients?
Not a whole lot, but we do talk about mental imagery sometimes as far as imagining a certain task and stuff. We will have them focus on certain aspects of their gait, like you do, for short periods of time. And we generally, like you, we pick one thing to do if we're doing, gait retraining or anything like that, or concentrating on one particular aspect of that, and then slowly increasing as they become more and more competent, and that becomes more of a subconscious maneuver for them.
Yeah. Well, and once I get people healthier, particularly the ones who are doing the longer miles, you got to think about something. And I said, look, every run you can't be thinking about what you're having for lunch or the troubles at the office. I mean, this is a meditative thing, and most people enjoy running for that reason. And so I tell them, look, if you're going on a 12-mile run, I want you to focus on 12 different things, one on each mile. So the first mile, I just want you to focus on cadence. The second mile, I want you to focus on foot strike. Feeling that nice mid-foot strike or whatever we're working on, forefoot strike, trying to reduce a rear foot strike. The next mile is, what do your knees feel like? Are you locking one knee out more than the other? How's the flexion? How's the loading? Is the knee tracking? Is it coming inwards? The next mile is dampening that lateral movement of the pelvis, trying to get them into a little less crossover gait. The third mile might be, or the fourth mile might be, let's have you see how far you can push the economy of that gait. And let's have you go a little bit more towards a crossover gait, very narrow, and see what that feels like. It's easier to feel that problem and what it feels like early on in a run, because typically as we fatigue that frontal plane and those glutes in the latter part of the run, we're starting to lose some of that awareness and it's harder to control it. So I like to have them do that early on in a run. And then a little further on, arm swing. Are they symmetrical? Is there good engagement of posterior shoulder and arm movement during hip extension on the other side? And then, of course, 1 mile, it's on breathing. And the next mile, it's on spinal posture. And are you getting a little sloppy with your head movement? So these things all are very helpful to a client. And a lot of my clients surprisingly do it, but there's a significant portion as well who this is kind of an epiphany for them. And I tell them, look, turn off the music. This run is about your body. This is about paying attention. Do that once a week, maybe. So it's just something I throw to my longer runners, just saying that running is supposed to be a meditation. Pay attention to different parts on each mile. So,
well, there you have it. You should actually have people imagining running while they're lying down or while they're sitting in the living room.
There you go.
Rather than just necessarily being cognizant while they're on the run. I mean, that's important as well.
Sure.
But then they're getting kind of a double workout, and maybe we'll see some of these crossover effects from the Sage Journal of Health Psychology.
I know you were going to the Sage Journal again there.
It's going to be my new go-to.
Yeah, it is. It's my that was from the Sage Journal. Okay, so this is something I tell my patients a lot of the time, and sometimes they ask, "Why are you going so far back into my history?" And I said, "Because everything matters." And I often joke, but in a rather serious tone, that your body has and your brain has logged all of these injuries that you've had, some of which you will remember, some of which you probably won't. Falling out of a tree when you're 6 years old, you might not remember it, but maybe that has something to do with that hip pain that you have. So I like to say that the brain logs these things. Do we know this for sure? No, we don't, but it is a memory. This study here is on amputations. It's out of Medical News Today, and they basically were looking at amputations and trying to figure out how long the brain retains that somatosensory cortex image before it's forgotten. And they've concluded that it's probably around 3 decades after amputation, but that's premised upon continued stimulation of that pathway, right?
Yes.
So, I'm reminded of the Ted Carrick video on Nightline that's on YouTube. If you just type in Ted Carrick, who's our neurology mentor, if you type in Ted Carrick, actually, I think that's, you can type in Ted Carrick Nightline, and it'll pull it up on YouTube. It's a 7 or 8 minute clip that Nightline did on him. And one of the kids in there was a hockey player or a lacrosse player who'd taken a terrible hit, got a massive concussion, and he had lost function almost entirely of his left arm. And for a goalie, that's not something you need, because that was his glove hand. And so they went through a couple weeks of care there, and they showed that he, over time, through correcting the pathways that he had obviously damaged to recognize it. And as Ted says in the video, if your brain doesn't know where the arm is, it doesn't know how to control it. And kind of the same thing here in the amputation. If the brain has some skewed information, you may get some skewed output. And so that was reminding me of that. And it came up wanting to throw this article in there because I have patients that come in, and there's one exercise that for some reason clients have trouble with. And for those of you who've been with us for a while, there's this video that I did called the Bringing the Extensor Hallucis Brevis, or Bringing the Toe Back to Life. And it's a video with a little yellow band teaching someone using a TheraBand how to bring back the short extensor to the big toe. And it's a rather involved video. And but I'm reminded how many clients I do this with when it's applicable to their case. They can't connect it to the brain. They lift the toe up into extension with the long extensor, but there is no awareness of how to engage that short flexor. But within 10, 15 minutes in the exercise, they start to reactivate that. But they will often say, my brain doesn't know what to connect to try and get that thing to move like that. Have you experienced this? And do you have any commentary on this kind of stuff?
Well, whenever we're looking at, when we lose a body part, the body keeping a memory of that part, that's, totally true. We know that about phantom limb pain and things like that. And we also know that injuries are stored, within the nervous system as well. And to kind of bring that around, you had alluded to the input's going to be slightly different. And if you think very simply just about mechanoreception, because that's probably our most important modality as far as I'm concerned. Without mechanoreception, we can't have learning, we can't have motion, we don't have movement, those sorts of things. So you've got this limb that's been removed that used to provide afferent information from the muscle spindle apparati, the Golgi tendon organs, as well as the joint mechanoreceptors, up to the brain through largely the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway, but also the dorsal column system. And then that information would be relayed from the brain back down through corticopontocerebellar pathways, through that anterior spinocerebellar pathway, which was that efferent copy we talked about. We've talked about that in other podcasts before. Well, what happens is the memory of that limb is probably stored somewhere in the temporal lobe. And that information is going to be sent from the cortex, the corticopontocerebellar pathways, back down. And what's going to happen is you're going to have a mismatch of afferent information coming in, because there is none from that extremity that's gone now, and information that the brain at least perceived was there at one point of time. And that can cause coordination difficulties and some of the other things. And it's my personal belief that a lot of phantom limb pain comes from that mismatch in that area there, and the fact that we cannot use mechanoreception to dampen pain. We know that movement dampens pain. Think about, you're hammering something and you miss and you hit your thumb. What's the first thing you do? You shake your thumb, right? So we're trying to activate the mechanoreceptors and stuff in that area. And those mechanoreceptors, those large diameter afferent fibers, presynaptically inhibit pain at a spinal cord level. We've known this for a long period of time. So things from joint mechanoreceptors, muscle, spindle, afferents, Golgi tendon organs, Pacinian corpuscle, skin receptors, etc., all will presynaptically inhibit pain at the cord level, as well as cortically through multineuronal pathways and descending pathways, like the cholinergic pathway and the dopaminergic pathways and things like that. Well, when we lose that aspect of mechanoreception from that limb, I think that you lose some of that ability to dampen that. And, it's all about pluses and minuses in the nervous system. It's either on or it's off, And when we have that stimulus that's traveling up, we're not able to effectively dampen that coming down. And I'm sure that there's more to it. You have to think about what happens to that area of the sensory homunculus, because we haven't actually figured out exactly how to map that, the amount of cortical real estate dedicated to a body part. So when that body part is missing, does that piece of real estate in the brain that represented whatever was taken out still remain, or is it slowly taken over? Is there overgrowth, kind of like path through the forest thing? And that goes back with injury as well. Do we see that when you have injured, you trash a joint and you trash a bunch of receptors. So you've lost that receptor population due to surgery, injury, whatever. What happens now to the amount of a cortical real estate that was dedicated to that group of receptors, that receptive field? Is it just less active? Does it get less input? So it really begs a lot of questions. And when you sent this across, and I looked at it, and this is out of that, I forget what it's called, but the neurology feed that we get, it made me think about that. And I would always think about Dr. Carrick talking about phantom limb pain, and he would always go through cases and stuff like that when we were taking the course of people with phantom limb pain and different ways you can manage that, etc. But anyway, that was kind of what I thought here. The study itself, which I did not read through, I read through the article here, but they talk about the original function area of the brain is not erased after the amputation. But are any of the areas erased, and how are they quantifying that? Would be my big questions there. But anyway, interesting study, and it's really not surprising to me at all as far as this goes. And I think we can extrapolate this much, much further, because it's all stored in there somewhere. It's just a matter of dragging it out. Why can people recall details of a scene or something like that under hypnosis when they can't recall anything consciously? When they were involved in a, robbery, whatever was going on. And
Right.
They put people in the area that were witnesses under hypnosis, and they're able to recall, the license plate numbers of vehicles that were there and all this information that's taken in that we like to think of that's in the background, that's not maybe in our conscious awareness, but is certainly in our subconscious awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the brain's amazing. I mean, that's kind of the premise behind these chronic ankle sprains we see all the time. If it's not completely rehabbed, those neuronal pools and the sensory and the motor input-output, it's not cleaned up enough that the brain knows exactly where that foot is. So occasionally you put that foot down in too far supination because the mechanoreception and proprioception is aberrant, and before you know it, you've rolled your ankle for the 8th time, And, that's why you have to rehab these things and clean them up. And if you don't, you see the chain build. You see the lateral hip weakness. You see the inability to control rotation at the hip. You see a lateral pelvis drift. You see an aberrant arm swing on the other side. These are things that we see, and that's what leads to a lot of the chronicity in these cases, and a lot of cases like that where the initial problem isn't completely resolved. I'm always reminded of your wheat field example that you know, you carve that or plow that neurologic field in really, neurologic pathway in really deep, whether it's the right pattern or the wrong pattern. And often trying to fix your client, you're trying to create a new, plowed row that is a cleaner pattern. It's more efficient, it's more economical, it has better skill, better endurance. But during that process of plowing that row, you occasionally, if you're not paying attention, dump back over into that old pattern and see those aberrant patterns start re-expressing themselves. Those are your clients that say they did their homework and didn't do the homework, and they come back in and they're having a flare-up of their pain, and you can't figure out why, but the client knows, gee, should I tell him I didn't do my homework? I lied to him. It does happen. I always tell my patients, just be honest with me so I know where we are. I'm not going to get upset with you, but if you didn't do your homework, I'd like to know that that's why we're seeing what we're seeing here. So, and then of course you get the clients that you tell them to do 50 reps and they do 500. And that one's for you, Chris. Good friend of mine probably is listening to this. He's always experimenting. He's like, well, what if I did 500 of those? What would happen? And he'll come in with a whole new triad of problems. So, but you got to love those people, the ones that really, really want to get better and experiment and tend to push the limits. So they certainly make things interesting. So you just had another acupuncture course, and you'd mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about acupuncture here. I'm going to give you the mic and let you just discuss a few things there if you'd like.
Getting back just for a moment about what you were talking about just a second ago with the cortical representation article that we just reviewed, and chronic ankle instability and it being a cortical phenomena, there's a post that I did a few weeks ago. If you go to the Gait Guy's blog, you'll see it there, or you can research it on Facebook. But basically it talked about 3 different acupuncture points that they used for ankle instability. One was stomach 41, one was bladder 60, one was gallbladder 40. Basically, they're all points around the ankle. Stomach 41 is right on the dorsum of the dome, right near the tailonnavicular articulation. Gallbladder 40 is just anterior to the medial malleolus, near the extensor hallucis longus tendon. And bladder 60 is located, retromalleolar on the lateral aspect, kind of where the peronei come around. And if we think about the increased afferent input from utilizing acupuncture needles to the cortex, we can see how it could help with mechanoreception, balance, and restoration of function. And this isn't the first study that we've talked about CAI, and certainly not the first one we've talked about acupuncture aiding some position, whether it be joint position sense of the knee, osteoarthritis, etc. So there's a lot of mechanisms involved with acupuncture, and the most common question I get, because we do obviously a ton of acupuncture and needling, and I teach it all over the country. I've written books and stuff on it, or papers I should say on it, in the process of writing books and stuff on it. The biggest question I get is, how does acupuncture work? What does this do? And I get this from a lot of the physicians that refer us work. So I like to break it down and say, look, acupuncture has 3 predominant effects. There's a local effect where I insert the needle. There's a effect that goes through the cord. And then there's a long loop effect that goes through the brain. And to explain that further, where I insert the needle, I'm doing damage to the tissue there. I am causing an injury. I am a foreign invader with a needle, or whatever I happen to be sticking people with. They started with rocks and then bones, and then they graduated eventually to metal needles down the road. So I'm doing local damage to that tissue, and I elicit an inflammatory response, and I get a response from local tissue factors, local tissue cytokines, as well as paracrine factors, which are going to do a couple things. One, they're going to immobilize the immune system. 2, they're going to cause mast cell degranulation, so we're going to get histamine and heparin release, vasodilation to the area, etc. And then I'm going to have chemotactic factors from the cytokines released that are going to bring white blood cells and that kind of stuff to the area. And so that's number one. The second effect goes through the cord, and the one that goes through the cord does that same thing we just talked about a minute ago, that whole presynaptic inhibition. So by stimulating large diameter afferent fibers, whether I'm using a needle, my hands, an exercise, whatever, I am causing presynaptic inhibition of pain fibers as they come into the cords. So in other words, as the pain fiber comes in and synapses with the second-order neuron to go up to the brain, you basically, that second-order neuron never fires because it never reaches threshold. And then the third effect, of course, is the long loop effect. And there's a couple effects here. Number one, the first effect is the information. If it's a painful stimulus, which acupuncture, is going to be a little uncomfortable. If you go to somebody and it doesn't hurt at all or you don't feel it at all, it's probably not going to work very well because you're going to lose a large part of the effect. But that pain stimulus stimulates the descending inhibitory pathways for pain, your body's little endogenous opiate system, which modulates pain. So that's one effect cortically. The second effect is it activates the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So it can have a strong effect on hormones, which is why acupuncture is so good for like hormonal issues, and it can be good for sleep. It's good for menstrual disorders, stuff like that. And then the third thing is there is a change of afferent input to the cerebellum and the motor cortices, and it alters muscle spindle tone. We used to think that the whole dry needling thing was all a local or segmental phenomena, but we're realizing more and more now that it's actually a cortical phenomena. So you alter gain on the descending pathways, largely the corticospinal tract, but other pathways as well, descending inhibitory pathways, which synapse on the neuronal pool in the spinal cord, which affect the function of the alpha motor neuron, the neurons that go to the muscles that tell them what to contract, as well as the gamma motor neurons, the ones that go to the spindles of the muscles that determine the amount of tone in the muscle. So that's my basic explanation to everybody about how acupuncture works, particularly when I talk to other physicians or clinicians, but also with patients. I just, we dial it back a little bit on the vocabulary there. But I think that a lot of our listeners, because whenever we put acupuncture posts up, we usually get quite a few questions and quite a few hits, and sometimes, some little chastising that, I need from now and then about technique and things like that. But it also, I think, increases people's awareness, and I like to think that it's helped to push a few people in the direction of wanting to pursue a more education in that field. I got into acupuncture, and I'll tell a very, very brief story and then end it there. But I had a dog, a German Shepherd, who became epileptic just prior to his first birthday. And we were everywhere. This is the $6 million dog. We had him at CSU, you name it. He was on the medication, whatever. And I ran into a friend of mine who is a veterinary acupuncturist at a chiropractic seminar. And she's like, she says, you should bring your dog to me. I'm going to be in Edwards next weekend at a dog show. Just meet me. So I'm like, what do I have to lose? So I go out there, and I have to admit, I was very jaded on acupuncture at the time, did really not think very highly of it. But at this point, if they told me to wrap my dog's head in cabbage, I would have done it if that would have helped him to be better. Well, I take him out there. She gives him a treatment, and this is a dog that would seize consistently every 10 days for about anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. And then he'd be post-ictal for a couple of days, then he'd be good for about a week, and then he'd go into it again. He didn't have a seizure for a month. So I called her up. I'm like, hey, I have no idea what you did, but you have to teach me how to do this. And that was my whole journey at the beginning of acupuncture. And it started with auricular ear acupuncture, and then it expanded into, what it's become today, developing my own techniques, etc. But anyway, enough about that.
It's always good to know. It's good for people to know, some of the stuff that you do. We both do some different things, and it's nice to know, let people know a little bit more about that. So, acupuncture, you and I took a course from Dr. Ma many years ago. That was a kind of a musculoskeletal acupuncture that was very informative, and I enjoyed that. But I think that was kind of really a launch pad for you, wouldn't you say?
I've had the opportunity to lecture with Dr. Ma a couple different times. Yeah, kind of. I mean, I've just gotten so interested in all the different aspects of so many things that you can do that it's just become a standard treatment modality for me, along with all the other stuff that I do. So it's just another tool in my toolbox. But I would say, that was probably close to the launch pad, and then it's really blossomed from there. Yeah. The more I read and the more I attend, seminars and conferences, the more I add to, like to think anyway, that I add to what I know, and then what I'm able to share with others as far as things that we've discovered, etc.
Yeah. So this week I put up a photo of me standing, and it got some fairly good attention, and I know that it brought up some thoughts in your mind, and I'm still processing it. I did 2 posts on it, and I think I called it the turning or something like that. And the first day I just asked people to look at the feet and tell me which way I was looking over or turning my head or looking over a shoulder. And as I started thinking about it more, I started thinking about sports. And so the next day I followed it up with, looking over a shoulder, catching a football. Well, you better have cervical rotation. You better have some thoracic rotation. If the foot's on the ground, the moment you turn, you better have internal hip rotation. And you better have some stability on the lateral aspect of that foot, because with all that rotation, you're going to be supinated. And hopefully you've got enough lateral foot stability. We're going back to those to the ankle sprain dialogue. You better have enough lateral stability in order to maintain that supination without going 1 degree too far and turning it into an inversion sprain and having some musculoskeletal and ligamentous damage. So, I was thinking, well, what about the other foot? And I alluded to that in the second part of the article, and you can find these on our blog. It's called The Turning. It's the date today is September the 11th. So I did it on November the 10th and 9th, I believe. And I thought, well, what about the other side? So if you're looking over your left shoulder, you need left cervical rotation. You may have some thoracic rotation if you're trying to turn a little further. You may have to have internal rotation on that left hip and supination on that foot. Well, obviously, if you've got both feet on the ground, you're going to have the opposite on the other side. You're going to have pronation at the foot. You're going to have external rotation at the hip. You're going to have the opposite thoracic rotation, and you're going to have external rotation occurring up at the neck there. I just thought, wow, this is really actually just a magnification of gait. We are always moving the arms in phase or antiphasic with the lower limb. So as the left arm goes forward, the right leg goes forward. And so the opposite upper and lower limbs are paired together. And during that process, because they're moving in the opposite direction, there's a little bit of rotation occurring through the cervical thoracic lumbar spine, and even some oscillations in the pelvis, but they're supposed to be symmetrical. And so it started as I was driving to work today. I started thinking, well, what about all these asymmetries? We're always talking about asymmetries, and if you stick a little bit of asymmetry in there, maybe one foot's got a little bit of forefoot varus, which is going to cause a little bit too much pronation. The body has to adapt to that on that side, but also on the other side. It just brought up a lot of thoughts of really how intimately connected all this is. And I know we talk about it, and I know that we know this, but sometimes when you look at something a little from a slightly different perspective, the filter becomes a little clearer, the vision becomes a little clearer. You tend to see things a little bit more purely. Obviously I was thinking about a lot of soccer players then and basketball players, and why certain people have troubles cutting to one side. And this is something that over time I've always asked clients, especially my sporting athletes, when they've got a problem, for example, in the right leg and it doesn't feel stable, or they're having a rotational problem. Hey, do you have problems cutting on the field from going off that right foot, cutting to your left real quick? Yeah, I do. It's not as sharp as the other side. And I thought, well, that's why. I knew I was asking the question, but it suddenly just became a little bit more clear to me. And you followed those posts up with that single leg stance test that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here today. Did any other thoughts come to your mind? Some other things that maybe you were thinking about from my write-ups there? You always have some neat neurologic insight on some of these things. And, I'm always thinking about the brain and the balance of that, its sensory input in, balancing out motor output. But we're just inherently not symmetrical creatures. We've got a dominant eye, a dominant ear, a dominant limb, upper limb, a dominant lower limb. So we're just built with all these asymmetries. And I know I'm kind of all over the place here, but just kind of wondering if you had some thoughts and maybe I spurred some ideas there.
First of all, I thought the post was brilliant. It was stuff that I guess I knew, but I never really thought about as far as that goes. But looking at the feet and which direction is my head turned or which direction is my body turned. So first thing I would say to everybody listening, go back, read those 2 posts, and then come back to this point and listen a little further. we need to discern, number one, now you're going to see the same effects that occurred in both feet. So what happened as Sean was standing, he rotated his head and his torso to the left. And what you saw is increased supination on the left side and increased pronation on the right side. Okay, that's pretty much what you see, looking at from the rear foot. Okay, and we need to discern there that there's two effects going on. One is we'll call it a biomechanical or mechanical effect. In other words, as Sean rotates his torso and his body to the left side needs to supinate. That's that chronic ankle instability thing he was talking about. So the planted leg, the side on the side that you're rotating to, needs to supinate to provide a greater amount of stability, while the opposite side needs to pronate and allow movement. But there's also, as you guessed, a neurological component to what's going on. When we rotate our head to the left side, we're going to facilitate extension of the left upper and lower extremities, in other words, physiological extensors, and we're going to facilitate flexion of the right upper and lower extremities. And this is all through a tonic neck response, Bobat's work back in the 20s and even prior to that. And I would encourage you that you can do this. Take a picture of somebody rotating their head only to the left, and then head and torso. And you're going to see more of an effect when they do head and torso because the gravitational requirements for balance are that much greater. So this invokes, one, obviously cervical mechanoreceptors, things in the joints. And number two, it invokes the vestibular system as well. And, we think of the semicircular canals, the little hula hoops inside our inner ears, as doing angular acceleration. So as I'm turning, I'm getting this effect that's occurring. And then you've got the utricle and saccule, which are in there, which are going to do predominantly linear acceleration. And remember that the vestibular system is largely due to its position of the head. And then on top of this, we need to add in eye movement. So if I just move my eyes to the left, I'm actually going to get the same sort of an effect on a much smaller basis, which is going to occur because as I move my eyes to the left, that's hooked up to my neck through what's called my cervical ocular reflex, through a bunch of different pathways, and that's going to affect neurologically what's going on as well. So when we're looking at people here that have CAI or other conditions, people running on a field, they're going to rotate to do that. We have to think about, one, there's a biomechanical effect. Do you have the biomechanics and the muscular integrity to be able to do this? And number two, the neurological effect. In other words, is your nervous system on for that particular day, on that particular task, and is it up to it? Or are we going to have a little bit of, what I like to call neurological mismatch or fudge factor going on? In other words, our nervous system gets lazy and we interpolate a lot. So what happens is we start on one thing, and rather than going through the entire thing, we default to the, most common scenario pathway, and we kind of utilize that pathway and work our way through it, which is why it's easier to do a lot of tasks like running and skiing fast with good form than it is to do slow with good form, because you have less of that cortical fudge factor, and we've talked about that before. In fact, there's a very funny post on the Tumblr blog. If you could just type fudge factor into the search engine, there's a big Ben & Jerry's fudge ice cream container there and a post going on about that. But getting back to the post, there's two. So we're going to elicit our physiological extensors on the side that we're rotating to, and our physiological flexors on the side contralateral to that. And now you have to think about, is the movement congruent with what's going on? As far as if so I'm rotating to the left, my torso, to catch a football as I'm running. Well, with my right arm being flexed and coming up, that's physiological congruent. But my left arm wants to be extended, as does my left leg. Now, the left leg's probably not a problem, but now I have this physiological mismatch between what's going on in the upper and lower extremity. So do I have enough neurological and biomechanical integrity to overcome that? But that's the stuff that was going through my head when I saw it and I read your post first. I was like, that's brilliant. And when you said, which side am I turning my head to? The first one I read, it's like, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. So it really was eye opening. And then when I read through the whole thing, I was like, wow, that's what I like about a lot of stuff that you do. You take these mechanical concepts and you boil it down with everybody's it's easy to understand. You ask me what time it is, I tell you how to build a clock. He asks you what time it is, and you just tell people what time it is. And that's the difference between the two of us. And that's a fine thing. There's no problem with that. And I think that's a good thing for us as a team here.
Yeah, it is.
But
it is. I think of you as the special sauce or the hot sauce or the stuff that, I'm a big sauce guy. You kind of spice things up and add the sauce to it and kind of complete the meal. And, that post came from that article that I read. That's, and I think I'll try and put it in the show notes here because it wasn't actually in our itinerary here. But you certainly go back to the week of November the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and you'll find that article there, or on the blog or on social media. But it kind of it's funny how things come at you, and I don't know if that's a karmic thing or not, but I have a lot of doctors that come in and see me, and they always said, you always have the same routine. You say, lie on your back on the table, and you always check ankle dorsiflexion, hip rotation, and hip extension. Do you do that on everybody? And I said, yeah, it's just habit. And the one guy said, so why do you do that? Talk to me. Talk to me while you're examining me, and talk to me. Tell me what's going through your head, because you could see that he was really engaged in why this was working when nothing else had worked for him. And I said, look, you can't test a lot of people when they're standing up and moving. You can only see what they're doing. And I went on that whole diatribe that we always do, that what you see isn't the problem, it's just how you're moving with the parts that are available. I said, so the only thing I have is to see what you're doing on the table, or to see what you're able to do, or to see what your body parts are able to do. And then as a little sidebar from that, you and I have talked about this. Just because you have ankle dorsiflexion on the table doesn't mean you're going to have ankle dorsiflexion on the ground. And we see that all the time, because that's, ankle dorsiflexion on the table is a passive and or an active movement. But when you weight bear on it, there's a whole, cylinder of muscles around that joint that have to be working together in harmony and up in the hip. And you may not have enough hip extension in order to achieve the ankle dorsiflexion down at the lower end, and so it expresses as an early heel rise because of an impaired ankle rocker, where on the table, hey, wait a minute, it was fine on the table, why aren't you using it? So there's a lot more factors to it, and that's where the neurology comes into a lot of this. But, I just have these habits, and I'm sure you do too in your physical exam. It's just where I start, because that's my interpretation, or the information I need to interpret how you are moving, perhaps, So then I go watch them walk, have them come back on the table, examine something else, go have them walk again so I can see what that looks like. Are you using it because you had it on the table? Or no, you don't have internal hip rotation. Let me see what you're doing. This whole dialogue came up again right after I'd written these posts. This guy had loss of internal hip rotation, and he was having some ankle pain. And his ankle pain was lateral, and the peronei tested weak, and he was having some pain over the fifth metatarsal, and there was some pain over the lateral gutter. And, I examined his foot, and there was great motion there. But when I tested his glute medius, he didn't have much glute medius activity. So he'd lost internal rotation. His glute medius and his spinal stabilizers from the quadratus lumborum, the frontal plane stabilizers weren't really working that well. And the lateral ankle wasn't stable. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I just wrote about. You don't have internal rotation. So every time you go and do your activities, and he was a multi-sport, he was playing racquetball, he was swimming, running, of course, and he played soccer in the evenings twice a week. And I thought, every time you go ahead and turn on that leg, you don't have the full rotation to make that cut, so your foot has to supinate a little bit more, and there was the chronicity at the ankle and why the hip was drifting. And I thought, oh my God, even I'm learning from myself, and I think we kind of do this. I think that's why I enjoy these podcasts, is you and I end up talking, and we open up little windows and cupboards of knowledge that, like, oh my God, I never thought of that. So you do the same thing for me. So don't think it's a one-sided thing. At least I hope you never do. So
it's an interesting journey, looking at all of the different things. And I'm constantly, because I look at things, I think you're an ortho guy, so you're always looking at things like mechanically, and I'm a neuro guy, so I'm always looking at it neurologically, and we're both correct in different ways as far as that goes. And, are there incongruencies in what's going on, and then what's driving that incongruency, and how is that related to the patient's pathology, or, whatever is going on, and why they're there, and does that in fact relate to their pain, or is their pain from something else, and compensation, whatever. But it's no, it's all cool stuff. But yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. The article was really good, and the way you took the article and put the spin on it, looking at that was just great. I mean, I always knew, neck affects function of everything. That's one of the things I teach in my courses all the time about where's the highest density of mechanoreceptors. It's in the suboccipital musculature. It dates back to the research of Vidal, and we can go through and we talk about cervical ocular reflexes and all those sorts of things. But it really, it really does drive it home. And the mechanical aspect, you can't neglect, the center of gravity on individuals and patients and how much the body is going to do two things. One, it's going to really try its absolute hardest to keep the visual axes parallel with the horizon. And number two, it's going to try to move your body weight and mass over the center of gravity because that's where it feels most stable. And those are the two things that almost everybody's going to do no matter what's going on, whether they're functioning well, symptomatic or asymptomatic. And if you can keep those in the back of your mind, you can think, oh, yeah, he's trying to keep his head straight. So it's like the guy that has a neck problem, and he'll actually come in with a lower back problem because his body's tweaked to the side. Because if he has a neck problem and it causes him to hurt if he bends his head to the right, he's going to hold his head to the left. So if he holds his head to the left long enough, right, what happens is his superior oblique on one side and the inferior oblique on the other side, and his eye muscles become fatigued, and they don't like to hold the head like that, so he'll shift his hip to the left-hand side to bring his head parallel with the horizon. Mm-hmm. So now you've got a really simple thing. We see this with people that come in with torticollis that have had hockey injuries, and they get, they take a puck or a stick to the orbit, and it subtly damages the superior oblique. So now all of a sudden they've lost the ability to, rotate the eye about the z-axis in its socket. And when we lose that, the other eye was working fine, so you're always going to tailor your symptoms to the pathological eye, and the head's going to tilt in one direction. So when you see people with a head tilt, is it a visual thing that's going on, and do they have something going on up in their, up in their brainstem that's affecting eye function rather than something down lower, which is basically the compensation. And we always talk about, what are you seeing? You're not seeing the problem; you're seeing the compensation for the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be cool if we both if we practiced together and we all both saw every patient, but then we'd probably see 2 people a day. Yeah,
that wouldn't be very cost effective unless we charge like $3,000 a visit or something like that. Because
or have a hot dog
realistically, you could spending all that time and doing all these cool things, and then I'd do something, and then you'd think of something else to do, and then well, we've done this. I've come out and spent time in your office before. And, spent like way too long with people doing certain things. Like, I remember one particular gal that was having a difficult time. So we had her down on the floor and we showed her some different cross crawl maneuvers utilizing a rope to get her to actually get this maneuver. So she's able to bring the one arm forward and the opposite leg forward at the same time. And it was a motor coordination. I believe it was a cyclist that I had seen at your place. But it's all great, and sort of being in the best scenario, that would be fantastic. And if we were in the age of not really needing to practice or could be totally philanthropic, then maybe we could do stuff like that. The Allen Warlop Center for biomechanically movement disorders or something like that.
Yeah, we would have to have the hot dog stand out front though to make up the.
Well, we'll sell T-shirts.
Some of the hot dog stand and T-shirts to make up for the financial loss, and
T-shirts, right.
So
right.
we got a couple minutes. Do you want to do some of the cadence? You want to save it for next time?
I think we're at 50 minutes here. I think that was pretty good, and
okay,
leaving that on I think leaving that on that note is really good. Unless, of course, you have something else that you'd like to discuss.
No, it's all good. It's all good. One last thing. I used to just, when I watched my clients walk, I would just watch them walk away and come back. But since that article just this week, I'm watching my patients turn. And it's funny how many of them will turn the same direction each time. So you might have them walk up and down the hallway 4, 5, 6 times. They make the same turn to the right or to the left, no matter which end of the hallway they're at. And so it's interesting, and I've noticed this. tell them to turn the opposite direction, and you see some of these things come out. Maybe they're not having enough internal rotation to make the turn in one direction. The brain knows that. The body knows that. It's easier. It's more economical. And then you go back on the exam table and you go, oh, there it is. So we're going to walk again and have them turn the other way, ask them what it feels like. And so certainly opens up a whole new perspective for me. It did this week, and that's what I like about practice. So when you learn something, you can start applying it, and you start to see the changes right there. So just something for you guys to do in your practice and in your clinics, and in your coaching venues there. Start looking at the turns as well. So
well, like you can also have them put their hands up over their head when they're turning. Or make them do something totally different, keeping their arms at their sides, or make them hold something and making them do that, because that's going to really bring out, especially if you have the hands over the head, what's going on lower body-wise. The other thing that you can do is when we turn, let's say we're turning to the left, since we're talking about turning to the left, you have a tendency to flex your right arm and extend your left arm and left leg so you can spin, create supination and spin around the left lower extremity. So have them extend their right arm and flex their left arm as they're turning left. And a lot of times that will really bring about, it'll bring out, because what it does is it taxes the nervous system. You've got a neurological reflex going against volitional activity, and there's a mismatch, and it's really going to have a tendency to bring out pathology. So that's a good way to, and when I say pathology, I just mean other than what we would expect to see. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's terminal or that they should be sterilized so they can't reproduce or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks that we do, and maybe we'll talk about it in another podcast. Have them carry a 2-pound weight in one hand just to make some changes in arm swing to see what it does to the opposite limb and see what it does to the torso. There's a lot of little tricks that I use the hands over the head, like Ivo said, counting backwards from 100 to create some cognitive distraction and tap into those parts of the brain, try to exhaust those to see what kind of sensory motor expression occurs in your client. So there's lots of little tricks that you can do. We will talk about those things in another podcast. But good show. We wanted to thank our sponsors, New Balance, Chicago, and ultrarunning.com. Two great sponsors. They've been with us for a long time, and for good reason. We trust them, and we trust the products to bring to you guys. If you mention the Gait guys over at the New Balance stores, you get a small discount, I believe, and I'm not sure if Ultra still has something set up there, but you can certainly put it in the question box. I think they have a little box that when you check out, promo discount or something like that, type in the Gait guys or give them a call and see what they're willing to do for you guys, if anything. But heck, you don't need a discount if the product's good. Those are great shoes. Both companies, we love them a lot. So thanks for their sponsorship. Check them out. We trust in their products. So I'm Dr. Sean Allen in Chicago.
Dr. Ivo Worlup in Dillon, Colorado. We will see you in the shoe aisle.